This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. And if you could, please do me a favor and take a moment and leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you're listening to this on, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, doesn't matter. I would greatly appreciate it. And that feedback really helps get other listeners to the show. Also, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to geekleader.com/tip and donate to the show. Thanks so much. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Dr. Keith Dorsey on the show. He's the author of The Boardroom Journey, which we're going to talk a lot about. He's a researcher. He's got his doctoral degree from the University of Southern California, and he helps leaders like us make our way into the boardroom. Anyway, with that being said, Keith, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's great to be here.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into this journey that you have, and why you decided to write The Boardroom Journey.
It's a great question, John. I often tell people that this is my third chapter, the first being the U.S. Air Force for a number of years, and then I spent nearly 30 years in my second chapter, which was in corporate America. I primarily worked for two large companies, a Fortune 1000 for almost 17 years and a Fortune 500 for almost 12 years, in which I was in one vertical, which was sales. And I became a turnaround specialist and led very, very large sales teams throughout my career. So almost 17 years for that Fortune 1000, in which I moved my family from place to place, taking over, challenging sales teams and really lifting the hood to see what was under there and if they had a people product or a process problem within their organization, and then begin to make the tweaks to turn it around. And so I did that for a number of years, and then I took a sabbatical after 17 years with the Fortune 1000, and I wanted to see and figure out who I wanted to be when I grew up, and decided to work for Fortune 500, in which I did the exact same thing, but instead of selling to small businesses and managing teams that sold to small businesses, when I went to work for the Fortune 500, our client base was 80% of the Fortune 500. And so that took a whole different sort of human capital to pull that off. But I did that for almost 12 years. And then in January of 2019, I transitioned into my third chapter, which I called my portfolio career of doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And so executive advisory work, I serve on corporate boards and a total of 5 boards today, 2 private SaaS companies and 1 municipality, 1 university's business school, and then a nonprofit. And then I also work with a executive search firm. I was a managing partner and their U.S. practice leader of CEO and board services, but then transitioned into a senior advisory role because all during this period of my third chapter, I went back to school, as you mentioned, to get my doctorate in organizational change and leadership. And all my research was around corporate governance, corporate board refreshment, and corporate board diversity. And that's where the whole idea of this book, The Boardroom Journey, came from. And that book just was released by Wiley and May the 6th of this year. And so I'm focused on with a new company I just launched called Boardroom Journey, helping boards do things differently to get different results and to make certain that their board members within their board have the characteristics and competence and skill sets that are closely aligned with the strategy moving forward. So really helping boards refresh. And then on the individual side, I work with executives that are aspiring for their first board or their next board to intentionally take off their unconsciously competent governance. I'm sorry. And intentionally put on their consciously competent governance hat and when it comes to interviewing. And so I spend a lot of time with executives to make that intentional shift so that they can do the right things to not only be known, seen, but known. And when they interview, get the actual board position as opposed to being offered yet another C-suite position when they went there to interview for a board position. So that, just to give you a heads up on some of the things that I'm up to right now, but the whole impetus behind writing the Boardroom Journey came from my dissertation and all the work that I was doing around my dissertation. And basically, my dissertation chair shared with me at one point, she said, Keith, a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And you have way too much research to narrow it down to a proper dissertation. And well, what she said was you have way too much research to write your dissertation around all this research. You actually need to narrow it down. And I asked her if I did narrow it down, what do I do with all this other information? And she said, write a book. And so after I completed my doctorate in May of 2022, I continued research studies and my whole research around boards and getting executives and government officials on boards. And doing so, I ended up interviewing well over a couple hundred women directors, and I wanted to learn what worked for them. What were their enablers? What were their barriers? And how did they go about their corporate career or government career to transition successfully into a board career? And I also spent time with incredible and exceptional executives who have been trying to get on boards for many, many years to no avail, and really looked at those who did versus those who didn't, and what were the differences. And the book is really all about pointing out the various things that individuals did differently to get different results to get on corporate boards. So
interesting. Yeah, let's break this down just a little bit. And first off, I want to say, thank you for your service with the Air Force. Really appreciate, that.
Thank you, John.
But also I want to talk about boards because I've been on two boards. One was for a cybersecurity co-op, and the other one was for a nonprofit credit union.
Yes.
And when it comes into like being on the board, I'm curious your take on what the different purposes are for having a diverse board, and what are some of the advantages you see in there, and how do you go about making sure you have a board that's not just cherry picked, I guess you would say, to see one vision versus having a diverse board. That was one of the things that, so I was sought after to come onto that credit union board because they wanted somebody that was different when it came to technology, whereas most of their board was finance, accounting type backgrounds,
Right.
Politics and things like that, and they wanted somebody in tech to kind of come in there and have a different viewpoint, to kind of almost to play devil's advocate sometimes and to push back on certain things. And I fit that role very well. But I was curious of what you see typically when it comes to diversity in boards.
First of all, congratulations on securing those two board positions. That's outstanding. And kudos to the board that was seeking someone to challenge thought processes, seeking someone that brought the diversity of thought into the room. That's outstanding. Not all boards do that. The majority of the boards for many, many, many years typically had just a typical profile of an individual that they wanted for the boards. And they were typically former or active CEOs or CFOs. And because these are well-rounded people that understand the strategy, have the business acumen, ran businesses before successfully. So these were oftentimes incredible executives that were asked to serve on boards. But like I said before, they typically came from one of two roles: a chief executive officer or a chief financial officer. And 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 what we see now, boards are expanding their reach a little bit more, largely because if boards were seeking more women to serve on boards, there weren't as many women in the CEO and CFO roles. So if they were only fishing in a CEO or CFO pond, it made it very difficult to find enough women. And that's where that myth came from, that I would hire and put more women on my boards if there were more women out there that were qualified for the board. And, even in my role as a professional search person, I still run across companies that say, Keith, we're looking for another board member. Can you find me a former or active CEO? And my question back to them would be, or point and question would be, look, you have 8 former or active CEOs on your board right now. Do you really need a ninth?
Exactly.
And he would say, well, what do you mean? And I would talk to them about the skill sets and competencies that they have with each board member today, and to get them to realize where they have a redundancy of skill sets and competencies, and then also have them focus on what their strategic objectives are moving forward. And because of their strategic objectives, where do they have gaps on their boards? And what we found during the pandemic, that more and more boards were experiencing gaps around supply chain issues, experiencing gaps around talent management issues. Also, prior to that and post pandemic, experiencing gaps around cybersecurity, AI, and many other areas. And when you begin to focus on the areas where they may have gaps of skill sets and competencies on their board, it opened up the door to be able to recruit, in my previous example, more women, because more women were found in those roles, and it afforded them the opportunity to be able to recruit from an age diversity standpoint, younger executives, younger senior managers that have not only the skill sets around cybersecurity or AI, but also the business acumen around business, period, where they are hopefully effective corporate athletes as well. And that's where, in your situation, John, those boards probably found you. They were seeking someone that had the technical expertise that you brought to the table, and probably the cognitive diversity that you brought to the table, and from a functional standpoint as well as age standpoint. And more and more boards are beginning to do that. And you get away from groupthink when boards actually make that transition. And now they can do a better job of mitigating risk and also seeking ways to disrupt themselves and not only serve their shareholders, but do a better job of serving their stakeholders because of that cognitive diversity and functional expertise that you brought to the table.
Yeah, they were definitely actively seeking me. It was their CFO reached out, and we had a good relationship and met several times before. So he reached out and just wanted to know if I'd be interested and talk through it. I thought it was a pretty good fit, but I wish I kind of felt alone on the board.
Yes.
In a lot of senses because of it was a diverse board. Don't get me wrong; it wasn't just the stereotypical all old white guys or anything like that. It was a very diverse board. It had females on it. It had people of different races and genders, and it was great. But from a technology standpoint, I was the only technologist on the board, and that did make me kind of feel alone sometimes when I would push an issue. I kind of wish I had someone else that would understand a little bit better
and maybe I needed to do a better job of communicating as well. That may have been something that I fell short in.
That
And
often happens, John, in those scenarios when you're the one and only, whether that's
Mhm.
ethnicity or gender or age or functionality. And
Mhm.
a strong committee chair or chair of the board will make certain that they help that individual that and feels like or may actually be the one and only on the board, seek allies and have mentors and also sponsors at a board level to help them along, because it can be lonely until you get to critical mass. But
Yeah.
when you're out on a board from a functional standpoint, and to be that tech person, it requires learning ways to have a meeting before the meeting and to seek allyship and different things like that. And that meeting before the meeting, you might bring up, we're going to, by looking at the agenda for this week's meeting, we are going to talk about these things. I would love to bounce some ideas off of you prior to that, just to see if you agree with some of my thinking there, and if so, to be able to chime in. And so that's when people are bringing that, whether it's demographic diversity, observable diversity, or cognitive diversity to the table. The beauty is to be able to have that meeting before the meeting and sometimes meeting after the meeting to get support. And so you don't feel like you're on an island by yourself. What you were communicating was probably dead on. It's just a matter of getting a bit more support prior to the communication.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I should have, in hindsight, it's always easier in hindsight. That's probably one of the things that I should have done. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about the individual, because you mentioned a lot about meeting with women and figuring out what they did sometimes differently that would help versus that got on boards versus the ones that maybe didn't. What are some things that our listeners might could do if they were interested in pursuing an opportunity to potentially be on some boards?
You know, in listening to you shared with me the demographics of your listeners. I wish more people knew earlier on in their career that eventually they would like to get on a board.
Mhm.
In my 20s and early 30s, I couldn't even spell board. I wish, I fortunately ended up getting to a point where, like I said, now I'm serving on 5 boards in various areas, and so I lucked out in that scenario to a certain degree, but I would have orchestrated my career a little differently if I would have known in my 20s and early 30s that this is where I wanted to be in my 50s or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I share with people that are in the, I guess, the demographics of your listeners, to one, think about their career a certain way. So if you're in your 20s, and instead of just accepting every promotion that's put in front of you, just because it's paying you more money and it feels good to be promoted, but to be more intentional about the type of roles. And I'll give you an example. In my case, I worked my entire career outside of the military around this vertical called sales. And I all of my promotions were in that vertical. If I would have known in my 20s and 30s that I wanted to serve on boards in the capacity that I do today, I probably would have taken a branch management position, some sort of operational position with P&L role as well. And to get that much more board experience, that or not board experience, but operations experience that would translate nicely and transfer nicely over to a board position down the road, and be an even better corporate athlete than I am today. Thinking about someone with tech experience, and there are board members today that have that technology experience that came from various different softwares and programming language that no longer exists today. So they have the aptitude, but may not be able to offer as much knowledge around cybersecurity or AI, but they have a nice aptitude. And so that's good, but to be a well-rounded tech, I'm going to say a tech person might make them more attractive to a board down the road, and maybe gain other types of functional experience throughout their career by being intentional throughout their career is something that I would recommend to people that are in your demographic, the demographics of your listeners today.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Trying to get into more of an operational role or almost like an entrepreneurial type role where you're talking about, managing P&Ls and having that business acumen in general versus just having one, IT.
Absolutely. And some have, whether they were engineers, solution architects, or even on the track to become a CIO or CTO, I've seen some take roles in sales
Oh,
and
yeah.
became sales leaders and still kept their technical prowess along the way. That is just, they're becoming more well-rounded and improving their business acumen along the way, or they end up going the route of a finance person in a technology company. And so because they got their MBA along the way. And so just being more intentional about those sort of moves throughout their career, it seems to be what some of the people that I've interviewed did throughout their career intentionally and sometimes accidentally, that landed them onto incredible board positions down the road.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like having that, let's go back to the same word, diversity of experience has helped them become better board members.
Absolutely. And it's not so much to talk about all the things you've done to either get on the board or while you're serving on the board. The last thing the C-suite and the management team wants to hear is about all the great things you did. What it does is it builds your human capital, your down the road. Because you're able to see what's around the corner, probably because you've been around the corner before, and the C-suite of the board that you're on may not have. And so instead of telling them how great you are and what you did when you were in their role, you ask thought-provoking questions because it's not your first rodeo. And you get, by asking them questions, you afford them the opportunity to either answer the question or say, I never really thought about it that way before. And it forces them to go back to the laboratory and think about it a different way and come up with ways of handling the objection before they go around that curve. It affords them the opportunity, because of your question, to think about ways to disrupt their trajectory. And the saying that I often use is, just by asking the question, change ensues. And that's what a good board member does.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I did notice that a lot of times when I was on the board, just by asking certain questions, it would spur conversations that would go in a different direction, that I didn't even intend for it to, but it ended up, being for the better.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's go back to, let's say I am in my mid 30s or early 40s, and I'm at the point in my career where I'm an executive, but I've only been in tech. I'm interested in kind of branching out. What kind of role should I be looking for if I wanted to eventually get into the part of my life where I'm serving on different boards?
You think about some of the CEOs and look at their backgrounds, and CFOs, If you really look at their backgrounds, you find that some of them started out in tech roles. Some of them started out in sales roles. Some started out in finance roles or engineering roles, but their career kind of either serendipitously or purposefully ended up going different directions. And I will say, if you are executive and an executive in some sort of technology role, it may be the time, if you have interest, to become a general manager, especially because you understand and you partnered with other executives or other leaders, and you found that what they did and partnering with them interests you. It's something you were passionate about. And to have the intestinal fortitude to take a chance and do something differently, but make certain that it's something that can intentionally get you to where you ultimately like to go, and that is something that brings you joy. But to begin to think about where you are, well, first of all, where were you? Where are you? And ultimately, where would you like to go career wise? And how does that align with your aspirations to later serve on a board? And I believe, and I ran my corporate career this way, I would reverse engineer. You set a goal out there, reverse engineer what it takes to get to that goal, and then begin to execute. And by doing it that way, I had a batting average that was well over 900. Wow. Because all I did was really reverse engineer and then executed a plan. I don't know how many people actually do things like that, but it takes a bit of time to reflect about ultimately, what do you want? Now, I shared with you, I didn't take it as far in my career to say I ultimately want to serve on corporate boards. I just said I ultimately want to be in this senior executive role in the vertical of sales. And I ultimately ended up for Fortune 500 becoming, executive vice president and global head of sales. But I'd reverse engineered my way through that whole process, if you will. I would say, someone and your listeners, I would challenge them to do the exact same thing.
But kind of see where they want to go and what I like to always try to put myself in the other shoe, if you will. So like saying, like, if I wanted to be on the board, what would a chairperson be looking for another person on the board with my experiences? What am I lacking? How do I get that? I guess that's what you're saying.
That's it exactly. And the way that I challenge people to go about doing that is to find, companies that kind of interest you, not so that you can get on their board, but so that you can learn about the type of people they hire for their boards. And with the, LinkedIn app now and or platform, you can actually look at their profiles of the board members. So, for instance, if you would like to serve on a board in this certain industry, you could begin to look at companies within those industries, go to their website, find their board members, then find the names of those board members and look them up on LinkedIn, see what kind of trajectory that they had throughout their career and the type of functional experience and skill sets they have acquired, and then begin to look at your own trajectory and your own experience and say, okay, I could check the box in these 4 areas. Out of the 10 people that I looked up that are board members in the industry I would love to be a board member in, I have 4 areas that are all 10 of them have in common with I have in common with them, but here are 3 areas that 7 of them have experience that I don't. Well, what can I do in the next 15 years in my career to begin to gain that sort of experience. And it's that sort of intentionality in a reverse engineer sort of way that you can actually put in place to ultimately accomplish your goal. Not many people do what I just mentioned, John, but that appears to be a secret to success and getting on corporate boards is by figuring out where do you have gaps in your human capital and your director capital and begin to fill those gaps.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that a lot of people don't do that, but it makes perfect sense of why you should do that. What are some of the reasons why people don't try to like work backwards and do that research of finding the people and finding what their trajectory was like and then doing it? Is it because it's too hard, or is there another reason?
It's laborious. Yeah, it definitely is. But the other reason is they don't know what they don't know.
Mhm.
You'd be surprised how many people haven't been taught to do that. Some people figure I'm just going to work hard and things are going to happen. Other people believe in the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And because they know good people, have been able to get the sort of jobs that they previously have wanted. But unless they are taught how to reflect and how to and how to set goals and how to reverse engineer to actually hit those goals, they're oftentimes aren't going to accidentally get there. And the saying is, what got you here won't get you there is often the case when it comes from being a really good executive to becoming a board member. It takes different skill sets and to actually make that transition. And that appears to be something that most people don't realize. They think that by being an exceptional executive, they're going to be offered a board role. Being an exceptional executive is table stakes. You then have to do some things differently from a social capital standpoint to not only be seen, but known. And when it comes to boards, the saying is, it's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's actually who knows you that can land you a board seat.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. So how do we go about figuring out or improving who knows us? Is it networking, LinkedIn? Is it writing a book? What is it?
It varies. A lot of people say to get on boards, you really have to network and network like crazy.
Yeah.
Over 70% of the board seats are found via your network. Only a small percentage, oftentimes, around 20% of the board seats are found via a search professional. Many board readiness organizations and board related organizations talk a lot about network. But what does networking mean? And most people translate networking into squeezing palms and kissing babies and handing out your business card and letting other CEOs and board members know that you ultimately would like to be on their board. Doesn't typically work. And so people get frustrated. Incredibly talented people who can add a lot of value to boards actually get frustrated because the networking doesn't seem to be working. I like to break out networking in a couple other ways based on research and studies that I've conducted. The majority of the board members that I have found who have gotten selected and actually end up on boards, their networking looked a bit differently. One, they told anyone and everyone that they wanted to be on a board, not just affluential people, but and influential people, but they told anyone that they wanted to be on a board. And many of their board positions that they got on, they actually ended up getting on that board because someone knew them and knew that they were interested in actually serving on a corporate board. So I challenge people that when they go on autopilot and they're at a dinner party or they're at some sort of mixer or they are at a conference, that when they go on autopilot and they take 23 seconds to say what they do for a living, that's all about their job that they're actually in today, to add another 7 to 11 more seconds to their autopilot speech and say that, and I serve on 2 nonprofit boards and I'm looking to serve on a private company board in this industry. And tell anyone and everyone, because many board members, I was shocked actually before I did, once I conducted a few studies to find out that many board members they found their board because their babysitter knew that they were interested in a board. The janitor of their office building knew that they were interested in a board seat. Their dog walker knew that they were interested in a board seat because these individuals know people and oftentimes those people are their family members that will say, I'm looking for a board member right now. And they say, hey, I know someone. So don't think that you only need to tell other executives that you're interested in the board position or other board members. Tell anyone and everyone. Another thing that I share around networking is to get your name out there, whether that's via writing articles. If you are strong in AI, now's the time to be writing articles about AI. If you're strong around cybersecurity, now is the time to write articles about that. And oftentimes you're being asked to serve on panels and you are a subject matter expert in an area that people know very little about, and you get to serve on panels. And the example that, John, that I share with many is if you're sitting on a panel and there are 1,000 people in the audience and you kind of span across the audience, you know about 30 people in the audience. And so if you're going with that whole thought process, it's not what you know, it's who you know 30. But by the time you're done on serving on that panel, and that panel discussion was 1 hour long, there are 970 more people that know you that you will probably never meet. And so it's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And if you wowed them while you were on that panel and they like the way you think, and someone happens to mention to, one or a few of those 970 people who now know you that you don't know, that they're interested in a board position or a board person for their board,
right?
They may think of you and you never met them.
Wow.
That's networking. That article that went out to 20,000 people, they liked what you had to say. And that board, they are serving on a board that said, we need someone that has a really good knowledge around AI, but also really understands business. And they liked what you had to say in the article. They recommended you. That board reached out to a search professional and said, I want you to vet this person. And if people during that vetting process had favorable things to say about you, as well as the person that read the article that recommended you, you will hear from a search professional or from the nominations and governance committee saying that we're interested in talking with you. And you may ask later on in the process, how did you find me? And they said, you served on a panel or article that you wrote really resonated with someone and they recommended you. That's networking at its finest, not just squeezing palms and kissing babies. Does that help, John?
Yeah, it helps a lot. Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. It's all about, getting your name out there and in a positive light to any and everybody that might be able to help you.
Yeah. And you don't know who that person is.
Right. Exactly. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keith, this has been great. I think this is very helpful for our audience and for people that are listening. How can people that are listening learn more about what you're doing, catch up with you, or maybe pick up a copy of your book?
Well, they can go directly to my website, which is boardroomjourney.com. And there you can learn more about my accountability coaching or partnership coaching, as well as individual advisory coaching. You can learn more about the book specifically and the many different links to the booksellers internationally that you can go to buy the book. You also can learn more about me from my LinkedIn profile, Dr. Keith D. Dorsey. And in the featured section, you can see many of the articles that I've written. And you also can subscribe to the Boardroom Journey company profile on LinkedIn to get updates on the articles that I write as well. And so you can learn about the book via boardroomjourney.com, as well as my speaking engagements, articles, and many other things via LinkedIn.
Nice. I'll link those two in the show notes at geekleader.com so people can go there and click through as well. And again, Keith, thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it as well, and all the best.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Please go to geekleader.com to learn more about what this guest is up to, click on their links, and connect with them online. I would also greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave me a tip by going to geekleader.com/tip.